Especially you know where the secrets are.
Okay.
High all the way down there.
Chief, if you and Jerry want to come swap spots with somebody,
Is nobody coming?
I don't know. You can sit wherever you want. Why don't you guys? Bring your tags. All right.
Mr. Serpan.
Nolan and Rob come back. They come on here.
Accurately and
And
Oh, that's all.
all right, welcome to the Criminal Justice Working Group. We haven't convened in a while. We are have awaited an update on our projections from Dr. Austin. Those are now complete. And so we're going to hear an update on the projections in terms of what's happened in the last year since it's probably been about 6 or 8 months since we have had a recent OPP population update. And so we'll get that today, we'll discuss that today. And then there are 3 task forces who still have work outstanding that we're not going to get to today. But my hope is that after this report, we can then move to discussion of those recommendations from Rafi Comaneci's, actually it's not Rafi's, Sam, it's it's myself and Councilmember Clarkson on budgeting.
That's right.
It is the
And
sheriff,
Dr. Cowan.
and Dr. Cowan on
Jail size.
jail size, and then there's a third one that had some updates as well.
Flozell.
Lozelle and his team
That's right.
on, what was their topic though? Reentry. So those are the 3 topics, and ideally, we get this report today. We have another meeting about those items shortly, and then we come back with a third meeting in this series and see if we can wrap up this work at this time. We may not be able to do that, but that's, as your chairman, my ambitious goal, so that we can complete the work we started. We've had a number of things that have taken place in the last year that we can evaluate, initiatives that are being started that we can make assumptions about, and then we can take some action to further our work. So today's agenda again is simply to get the updated report from Dr. Austin, and so welcome all of the commission members, welcome the public, and I'll be happy to turn it over to Dr. Austin.
Thank you, Andy. And good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to do is give, as Andy mentioned, give an update of jail population trends. And I thought I'd begin by first going back in time a little bit in terms of how we got involved and what we've been doing in the past year. About a year ago, we got a contract from the federal government to come in and do a OPP jail parish prison population projection. And that projection was based on looking at current trends that were going on in the parish. You may recall that a baseline projection was issued which said if there was no change in policy, the OPP population would remain relatively stable at about 3,000. And then at the request of the working group, we did some scenarios of how that population could change, and we did those simulations, which basically said it might be possible to lower the pretrial felon population, misdemeanor population somewhat, and then the option of reducing the number of inmates that are housed at the DOC inmates. And that projection, those alternatives were presented as possible options that the that the parish could pursue. We have subsequently received a new contract from the mayor's office to do, I guess, about three things. One is to continue to start updating these projections to see how things are changing. And so with the cooperation of the New Orleans Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, we've now instituted a process by which we get regular feeds of monthly data that show us the arrest trends, and from the Sheriff's Office, we get very detailed data files now on not only the aggregate numbers of admissions and releases, but also detailed information about who is coming to the parish prison, how long they're staying, and how are they exiting. So we have instituted that process, which is very important. The third thing that we are to do is to institutionalize this tracking capability within the mayor's office, so that I can leave and not come back here again, and the parish can proceed to do this on their own.
And that's James Carter you're talking to.
Oh, is that?
The Office of Criminal Justice Coordination will be the people who get the track this.
Okay,
As
good.
opposed to the mayor's office.
Okay, I'm sorry.
He's in the mayor's office. But I just want to point out the place where this is going to happen.
All right.
Thank you.
I've talked to James on the phone, first time I've met you. Good to see you. So today, I'm just going to walk through the new trends. Everyone should have a copy of the report itself. I think they do. And then there's a PowerPoint, if I can figure out how to use it, which I'll go through part of it. There's tables in there.
Right there. Assistance.
Okay, okay. Sam's gonna help with that. Oh, it's recorded. Turn that off, sorry. And
You want to stand up or? Can everybody hear Dr. Austin?
you hear me okay?
It's difficult.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll speak up. So I'm gonna go through the major findings, and then there's tables that are in the report, tables that are in the PowerPoint. I will go through some of them, not all of them. As questions are come up, I can speak to particular tables that the findings are based upon. So let me go through the findings. The first thing we're looking at is the crime rate in the parish, the rate and the number of crimes. This is what's known as Uniform Crime Report data. That's serious crimes reported to police. Overall, that trend looks stable. The exception is that in the second quarter of 2011, as opposed to the second quarter of 2010, there was a spike in reported crimes. That was limited to property crimes, which is the most numerous. Violent crimes have actually remained stable or declined. So in terms of crimes occurring in the parish, relatively stable. There was this spike that happened in the second quarter. We haven't gotten the third quarter results. We should get pretty soon. I think I was aware of that spike. Hopefully it's a temporary issue and that the crime rate's not moving up in the parish. The more dramatic impact has been arrests. Arrests have dropped significantly since our last report, which is a continuation of a trend that goes back a couple of years. And it's dropped for all the categories of state, narcotic, city, traffic, and juvenile. And just to give you an idea of how much it's dropped, compared to the first 6 months of 2010 with the first 6 months of 2011, it's dropped 13,000. So this is a very, very large drop in the number of people being arrested. We don't have detailed information on exactly what kinds of crimes, but we think a lot of it has to do with the change in the arrest practices of people who are wanted on warrants but reside in other parishes. They are no longer being arrested, and there's also a citation and release ordinance that's been implemented, which is releasing people without making a formal arrest or bringing them into the prison system. Now, the decline in arrests has produced a dramatic decline in people being admitted to OPP because it's a 1-to-1 ratio almost. So we are seeing a big drop in the people being booked into OPP. And here in our tables, we can more clearly see this is for the warrants. The warrants have dropped very significantly. People being brought in on these warrants. They don't come in to OPP at the rate that they were before. Now, one would have expected perhaps that with this big decline in arrests and decline in admissions to OPP, we would see a drop in the OPP population. We have seen a drop to approximately 300 from what it was in September of 2010 to what it is today, which is about 3,000 and some change. But most of that drop occurred because the sheriff has reduced the number of inmates that are state inmates in his system. And that was part of the effort to close, which facility was that, Sheriff?
South Point Street.
Yeah, that facility has closed because it's used as a staging area now.
Construction.
So he's had to abandon that facility as a housing area, and so that has dropped the population. There has actually been an increase in the pretrial population. So state DOC population has gone down. There's been an increase in the pretrial population of about 100, and that is clearly occurring because the length of stay has crept up for people that are being booked into OPP and being released eventually. There are these pretrial, principally felon charged defendants. So it would suggest that something is going on in the courts for people being processed in the courts that is somehow increasing the length of stay. The last thing that I'll mention in terms of a trend is that the difference that we noted before in the length of stay between white and black people has continued. It's not gotten less, even when you control for the type of offense that someone has been charged with. That was an issue that was raised in our last report, and so that difference still continues. So in terms of the base projection that we issued a year ago, it remains valid, which means the OPP population is remaining at the 3,000 level, and it is not going to drop. It is not going to drop unless something changes with respect to court processing of people, primarily who are booked into the jail for the pretrial charges. The other opportunity to drop the population is in the area of the state DOC inmates, the extent to which the parish wants to continue to house them. And then also we have sentence misdemeanors and other residual kinds of categories. That could also be lowered somewhat, but the two big populations would be the pretrial felons and the state DOC. So that's the basic trend. Now let me show just a couple of the data here. Here you can see these are the arrests 2004 2010. You can see it's gone from 93,000 to 2007 down to 74,500 for all calendar year 2010. And then the next table, Sam, this shows it January to July 2010 versus 2011. 47,000 2010, 34,135. So a big decline in those arrest statistics.
and that's for all categories. State, narcotic, city, traffic, and juvenile. This is a time series chart which is looking at the bookings and charges that are occurring within OPP, and these are down, and they have continued to go down. There's been a stabilization here toward the end, but basically those numbers have been going down as well. This is looking at the population by the key statuses. Like I mentioned, it has dropped about 300 from what it was in September of 2010 versus September of this year. But the big drop is over here at the state inmates. That's the thing that produced the drop. There has been very little drops in the city inmates or the federal inmates. This shows the length of stay. And in this particular table, I've excluded the warrant releases and also people that are being processed for state prison. September to August 2010, the average length of stay was 14.7 days. Now it's up to 25 days. That's a very big increase overall. And if you look at the types of releases that are occurring, the length of stay generally has been going up across the board. So again, this is a function of court processing. So something, and also probably the extent to which, with the arrests down, what we're getting may be more serious cases that the court is handling, more serious in terms of the charges or their prior record or whatever the risk factors might be. The proportion of the population that's pretrial sentence is exactly what it was for these releases. 94% people coming out pretrial, 6% people coming out sentenced. So the big group here is in the pretrial releases, and that proportion of the releases is constant, so we don't see a shift there. Next slide. And this is the length of stay for pretrial releases by race. This is the last slide. Here you can see for whites, violent crimes, they have an average length of stay of 88 days. For blacks, it's 158 days. You can go through all these various charges, and almost across the board, you're going to see that whites serve much less time in custody than blacks. And that's that last point. Next steps, what we're doing, we're going to start instituting this process with Mr. Carter's office. We'll be training their staff so they can produce this report on a regular basis. We're really here at this point, I guess, to start learning more about what we plan to be doing, we being the parish, in terms of its plans for a pretrial service agency or its plans for other reforms that would change this trend. But right now, it's clear to us that that population of about 3,000 is going to remain steady until something else changes on the horizon to alter those dynamics. So at that point, Anthony, I think I'll turn it back over to you and entertain any questions.
Sure. So, well, thank you very much for coming back and giving us the updated report. The first question I've got is, you had two scenarios. One scenario was the base, which is reflected again in your conclusions today.
Right.
As I recall, there were other things besides pretrial that might have influenced the trend of lower local prison pretrial population. But pretrial was the biggest.
Pretrial is by far the biggest.
What were those other ones?
Well, we talked about, I think this is what we talked about, was the citation and release practices by the police, and that would be reducing the size of the misdemeanor, lower level kind of offenses. The sheriff has a fast track release program, which is, still is in place and is releasing thousands of people. I don't think we speculated about that increase, and I think it had to do with mostly in anticipation of the police department arrest trends going down. they've surpassed our expectations. They've really dropped. But, so I think what's left on the table, Andy, is going to be just the pretrial felons. That's the big group that is still there. I will say, across the board, the length of stay has increased for everyone. And
But based on what you just said, the previous projection of what would happen if we implemented certain reform efforts, given that some of those have been implemented, you would have expected actually a slightly reduced local prisoner population today.
that's correct.
You've seen the inputs reduced,
Right.
but the length of stay
Has
increase has offset any gains in that.
Absolutely. That's correct.
So the projection of what would happen with reform has actually not been borne out because of stickiness in other parts of that system, if you will.
Yeah, it's taking longer for people to get out of OPP than it was a year ago. If you had stayed where you were, I would probably estimate off the top of my head, your population would probably be down like about 2,700, something like that, maybe 2,600. But because of that stickiness, taking longer to process people, now, we can't really say much about the background characteristics of people being released out of the OPP in terms of their risk level, their prior record. We just don't have that information. If fewer people are coming in and police are restricting the arrest of people through citation and release, and also the warrants not coming in, it could be that what you're getting is a harder class of people that the courts, for a variety of reasons, are taking longer to process, less willing to release early, we don't know.
And when you say the courts, I'm assuming that it's the court system, meaning the prosecutors, the judges,
The whole system.
and the defense attorneys or the public defender.
Right.
It's collectively that process.
That's correct.
Okay, good. So it's not anything the sheriff is doing.
The sheriff is just the recipient of
Yes,
the various actions that other people are imposing upon
Okay.
these defendants.
Are there other questions from the panel?
What do you think explains, for example, on table 11, just out of curiosity now, so violent crime, the length of stay is almost doubled. On weapons, it's way out of line. On non-violent, it's a little closer. But on the question of drugs, it's the closest of any, and I don't, probably statistically significant, but maybe not much. What do you think? If you look at that around the nation, is that the same thing you see in other places, that length of stay is close on this question of race on this charge?
I have not, it's rare that you see this published anywhere, so I don't think there's any comparable data on that. Yeah, your observation is correct. On the drug crimes, that's where there's more parity between blacks and whites in terms of their length of stay.
Which almost seems counterintuitive to the way most people think drugs transact themselves in the North and South.
Perhaps. Yeah. But, yeah, these tables beg a lot of questions that can't be answered. I think if there's an overall, and this actually is a good point. We don't have in this jurisdiction what we call a risk assessment kind of mechanism. You will get that once you launch a pretrial service agency, because a pretrial service agency, the primary service, one of the primary things they do is a risk assessment of the person's likelihood to recidivate or FTA. So absent that, we really can't say, is this stuff explained by risk level or is it explained by other factors?
And then the one right underneath it, you and I were talking a little bit before we started, the highest percentage of people coming into the system are coming in on nonviolent crimes aggregated by the index, or coming in by nonviolent crime. Their stay is closer than violent crime, but on the other hand, that's the thing you and I were talking about, we need a lot more research somehow to find out what impact may or may not have been associated with the fairly dramatic increase in property crimes in calendar 11.
Right,
But it's a substantial increase, it's not, it's a significant increase.
Right.
It's gotta be the number it is.
right.
And the most people, the biggest percentage of people going in are on nonviolent.
Yeah, yeah, so if that starts going up, and that trickles or crossovers to the arrest statistics, that'll cross over to bookings, and that'll cross over to OPP population. So it's something to keep an eye on. I haven't seen, all I've seen is the first 6 months of your data, so your third quarter, it may be,
It looks like it
No
came
problem.
down, the spike is clearly in the April-May period.
Yeah.
And as we get into the third quarter, it's starting to come down some.
all right. Let me add something, just as context, which is kind of national context. Crime rates have dropped unbelievably in this country. The national crime rate today is what it was in 1972, 73, something like that. In Louisiana, its crime rate is now what it was in 1974. It dropped again in 2010. It's continuing to drop. Arrests across the country are dropping. And so what's happening, the first signal of this is the jail populations. The jail populations are starting to decline. We now have nationally, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, we have approximately 160,000 empty jail beds in the country today. And that's all being driven by the drop in crime, drop in arrests, which translates into drops in bookings into the jail system. And if you look at the major metropolitan jail systems, they have all dropped, virtually all of them have dropped. Los Angeles County, prior to realignment, had about 4,000 to 5,000 empty jail beds. Texas is reporting approximately 50,000 empty jail beds in the state.
I wonder how much of that should also be related to the push to build all that space and we need to do.
Well, we did a lot of building, a lot of growth, but, and so now, it's almost like, I won't say the war on crime is over, but it's getting close to a ceasefire. I mean, it's way back. California is amazing. California is now back to 1958. Criminologists don't know why this is happening, but it's just continuing to occur year after year after year. So that's good news. That's good news. The question is, can we translate that decline in crime to less expensive, more efficient criminal justice system?
It's interesting that that's going on, and we still see DJS reports that show nominal rates of repeat offenders within 3 years of release of the state or federal.
Yeah, and
Only 8 out of 10,
you-
7 out of 10.
yeah, well, the recidivism rates are not moving at all. So in state prisons, it's same results. About 40% come back to prison, 65% get rearrested. That's not budging. The recidivism rate is not budging. There is a tip in the state prison populations. Last year, 24 states reported a slight decline. There were slight declines. The big state that's going to move this year is California because of realignment, and they are to reduce their prison population by 30,000 over the next 2 years.
That's not a reduction in crime, that's a reduction in budget.
I can tell you, it's reduction in crime, it's reduction in arrests. I should also add, probation populations are declining, the whole system is starting to go like this. It hit this plateau and it's now going in a downward direction. Not a sharp downward direction, but it's starting to go down. And the jails are seeing it first. I should mention New York City. New York City used to have 22,000 inmates. It has under 13,000 inmates today. So it's a huge drop in its jail population. which was tied, by the way, to police practices, where they really focused on quality of life kinds of hotspot kinds of initiatives. So growth is over for the criminal justice system and correction. It's not happening. If anything, it's starting to twist and turn head downward. And I would say it's largely because of the drop in the crime, which is feeding into the drop in arrest, which feeds into drops in people being admitted to the system.
Probably someplace in their demographers have got to be seeing a drop in the crime going into.
Well, yeah, the issue on the crime, why crime has dropped, the number one culprit is the baby boomers, the at-risk population has dropped. Juvenile arrests is way down, 50% drop in juvenile arrests. So juveniles today, which is the next generation, I don't know how this is, but they are much more law-abiding than their predecessors.
Could be true.
Other questions from the panel? Somebody's got a question. Oh,
Yeah, and
Councilmember
I'm
Diddy.
really sorry that it absolutely is extremely frustrating to me. I had a city council meeting downstairs, and I don't know what's been asked, and I apologize for that. I wanted to look at one thing. You stated in your report that it appeared that there was an increase in city prisoners, but what it is the average daily population, and you attribute that to the length of stay.
Right, there's fewer people coming into the system for felonies. There's fewer people coming in charged with misdemeanors, but they are staying longer. They are staying significantly longer. So if you have been able to have kept the length of stay for those people that were being charged with felonies and misdemeanors, but mostly the felonies, if you could have somehow kept that length of stay, you would have seen a sharp decline in that pretrial population. But because it went, the other way, it has compensated for the drop in admissions with a longer length of stay, which means you have actually seen an net increase in the daily population of that pretrial population, particularly the felons.
And I'm looking at...
Now, why that's happening, I
Right,
can't
right.
answer those questions.
Okay, how do we get to the answer to those questions? Because that's really what we need to know. Because we are looking at fewer prisoners coming in, and yet those fewer prisoners are staying longer, which equates to a higher city budget, or at least one that doesn't lessen in terms of the cost. And also, we want to see, should these people be in jail all this length of time? So how do we drill down to the reasons for these increased lengths of stay?
If I can speak bluntly, and we'll do it from time to time, you should have put in place a pretrial service capability by now, which would be monitoring this, and you have not.
Okay,
And so because you don't have information on the risk levels and how long it's taking to go, from various decision points in the court process, I can't answer that question. I don't think anyone in this room can answer the thing. And we can tell stories about what we think is going on, but we don't know. All I can tell you mathematically, a lot fewer people coming in, but they're staying longer. And that longer is because of decisions being made in the court system. Everyone's got involved in this: prosecutors, public defenders, judges, etc. And or the characteristics of the people that they are addressing. So it could be, I just want to emphasize, it could be that the people that they are seeing now have lengthier criminal records. There's a filtering going in. They are more likely to have a history of failure to appear. I don't know. But that's, you need to get in a position, I'm kind of lecturing here a little bit, you need to get in a position to get this analysis upgraded so you can look at these decision points and see is it taking longer to get from A to B to C to D before you reach a disposition of these cases? And I'm sure we'll be talking about maybe ways we can do that, but that's the big black box that no one has a good understanding of what's going on in that black box.
And if we had right now in place a pretrial services program happening, we'd be able to drill down to those.
You know exactly what kind of people you have in your jail that are pre-trial. You have good information of how long it's taking to go from each decision point until the court disposes of the case.
And do you know that we have a pretrial services program with $500,000 grant for the Department of Justice? And it's like right about ready to start? Would you just
I've
let you
heard
know
about
that?
that, yes.
Yeah, okay, we've got a couple more things we've got to work through on that, but that program is not only ready to start, but the city intends to continue the funding of it after the DOJ grant runs out. We're just working through the last few issues we have with it. Okay, so then if you look at Table 9, the length of stay is increasing, table up there.
Yes.
What is court release? And I noticed that this loss of length of stay has gone from 17.2 days on average from September to 09 to August 10 to 30.5 in more recent time. And what is court release? That is the judge making a decision to let someone, no, I mean, not guess. What is court release?
Where's my district attorney? Court release. I mean, literally, what we get are the codes on these cases. In a code that says court release. Now, court release could mean, you can see what it doesn't represent.
Dr. Austin, Council Lady, first of all, because Dr. Austin and I went through these numbers in the past, but you got to realize, man, tell me if I'm wrong, this includes municipal court, traffic court, and criminal district court, these numbers,
Yes.
correct? And I'm going to ask Judge Alicante, I mean, there's no court release where you would just say, release this person.
Well, a rule to show cause on a probation violation, if there's no rule in the file, it's a court release, technically. I mean, that's one. The district attorney enters a knowledge process on court release.
No, I don't think would that be covered by court release?
Yes. You know, I don't want to say yes or no. We need to speak to the sheriff's data people, but I think it is included in there. But
Sheriff.
what I'm hearing is that you want more detailed information. What is a court release? And let's just say at this point, let's look at these. We can go through see some of these cases again and see what they look like. But it's in the database and it's called a court release.
Yeah, because it seems to me that if we understood some of the terminology in Table 9,
Right.
that we would be able to get some
Yeah.
idea of what's prolonged the length of
And
stay.
by court, I think, too, would be helpful.
And I mean, another one, if time served, does that mean that the person was convicted and they served their time? No, because this is all pretrial, right?
That generally means they dispose of the case and the judge will issue 30 days time served. If you've done 30 days, they give you credit for that time that you've done, and that's the end of the case.
Counsel, they don't have the people that go to DOC on there, so if you're convicted and you get sentenced to DOC, you don't see them up there. But
Right,
if you
I
get
know.
convicted and for whatever reason the judge does not sentence you to DOC time, but he says, you know, you've been in prison for 60 days, okay, I'm gonna sentence you to time served, so on and so forth. That's what time served is.
Okay, so then are all of these, I thought all of these were pretrial releases,
No, these are release types.
release period, okay,
Yeah,
all right,
this is how they're exiting the system.
all right. And then another one that's increased pretty,
Yeah, the warrants are out of here, and the DOC inmates are out of this
right,
analysis.
right, I see that.
And I just want to, it's striking, the number of releases has dropped from 35,000 to $27,000 for the same time periods, you know, September 2009, August 2010 versus September 2010 to August 2011. And I spoke with the sheriff, you know, he is feeling that there's a big reduction in the booking process now, that they're not seeing the volume that they were seeing before, which is great. This has really improved, I think, the operation of the OPP. It's a much safer intake process now. It's much more manageable. But because that length of stay went from 14.7 days to 24.9 days, if you'd kept it at that 14.7 days, you would have seen a big drop in that population, but we didn't. Okay, fewer people, again, doesn't mean exactly the same type of people are coming in now as they were a year ago. It could be that they pose a different risk. It could also be we got stickier stuff going in, and this is where a pretrial service agency would be invaluable in terms of understanding, you know, what kinds of people are we getting, pretrial in particular, and then how long is it taking to dispose of cases as they enter the criminal justice system and before they get disposed of. So time is money, I guess I would say. That's one thing to take away from this chart. Time is money.
In the category called just plain old release, went from 46.6 days average to 69 days.
Yeah.
What is release?
Bear in mind, we'll drill back on those categories,
Okay.
but the number there is very small. Right? It's not in 28 people, but it is a small, the big numbers are in the surety property bonds, court releases, sheriff's fast track. And the sheriff's fast track is a very fast release mechanism. Most people don't even spend a day. High volume, kicked out, and I believe these are all misdemeanors. He cannot release felons. He can only handle misdemeanors and infraction type offenses.
And Sheriff, could you speak to, I see the Sheriff's fast track went from in 09-10, 5,223 as the number of folks to 2,633, so like cut in half. And could you speak to how that happened or what that's about?
Primarily because of there was less intake eligible for fast track. So most of them were the people that were getting picked up on out of parish warrants. And so when less of them came in, we could do less of them.
It's kind of interesting actually, because it is a suggestion that they're getting maybe a more serious type of person coming in when the filtering's all done, because that thing dropped pretty good, like you said, 50%. He's got less to choose from what he had a year ago. The volume is down, but also the types of charges that are coming in are less suited for fast track release.
So no policy change on your part, just the police practices have changed in terms of who
Police
comes
practice,
in.
the big thing here is the drop in arrests. It's just, this is a major sea change. So that's very positive. The thing that I think that is the elephant in the room now is the length of stay. What's going on with the length of stay? I can't answer those questions because we don't have the detailed information to do that, but it's clear that length of stay, anything you can do with that length of stay, you can couple it with the drop in arrests and still maintain public safety, right? Because you got to make sure you're not releasing people that are going to go out and commit terrible crimes. If you can pull that length of stay in, then you're going to see that OPP population starting to go down.
And let's be clear, if the result is a conviction on state charges, we just ship them to a state facility quicker. So reducing length of stay doesn't equate to letting people out who ought to be in.
No.
It could well mean
They go faster to the state prisons.
that the right to a speedy trial is better afforded in Orleans Parish if that was the outcome, at least for those who were correctly arrested and then successfully prosecuted and convicted.
Yeah, and the profile here is pretty typical of all the big major jail systems in the country. In terms of the legal status, if you kick out the state prisoners, you know, the big group is the state felony pretrial population. About 1,300, 1,300 or 1,400, and unfortunately, that's the one that went up. That went up, over 100 on average.
But is the, I guess my question, to follow up on Councilwoman Guidry, is that because you said we don't have the data to explain that, and we don't have the data to explain it based on a risk assessment? But once we have the data based on risk assessment, there's still going to be some factors that, I mean, the speed at which an individual is arrested, charged, brought to trial, and either released because they're innocent or convicted because they're guilty, that process, you know, could either be fast or slow.
Correct.
And that has nothing to do with risk factor.
That's correct.
So how do you get at that question as well as to whether or not, I mean, if we had the pretrial system where we measured risk, and presumably the pretrial system works, and those who are not deemed to be a risk to the community are in fact bonded out and released. So they come back to face the court, but they're not in prison up to that point. There's still also the folks who we decide that individual is way too much of a risk to put out on the street again. They need to be in jail. But if the process were more expeditious, getting them to trial and getting that trial to a resolution, that's a separate measure that we've got to come up with a way to measure.
Right, and that would be, you have to start measuring, and I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't looked at the data system to see if it tracks, you know. The number one culprit usually in these things are continuances. How many continuances are being used in a case before they finally cut a deal or make a plea or reach a disposition? And so you'd actually be looking at, you know, here are high-risk felons, here's moderate-risk felons, here's low-risk felons. How long is it taking for them to reach a disposition in their cases, and is that time changing over time? So right now, we don't have a baseline for that, you know, in terms of, we don't have the risk level, and we are not measuring these steps that one goes through to reach a disposition in a criminal case.
Other questions?
And these are complicated questions because it's a complicated process. You can have a person with multiple charges, several judges are involved in this one person, and they're trying to resolve all these charges that one person might have, and it may take a while for that to occur.
Is there other questions for the panel members?
Dr. Austin? Last year, after you did your initial report, and then the Vera Institute did a memo, and then you did a response to that memo, and you stated that there wasn't really much disagreement between you and the Vera Institute, and the central issue is what reforms we were willing to put into place that would reduce the population. And you stated that the proposed new facility of 1,400 to 1,500 beds may be adequate to hold the entire or the vast majority of the Orleans prison population in the future. Is it still, are you still saying that, you know, we can't get to this decision or this answer simply because we haven't yet put into place those programs that will reduce the population in the jail?
Correct.
Okay, so it's still a possibility. We're about to start pretrial services, assuming we can get past this last
I would
stitch.
be very surprised if you did not put in place, I have to say, an effective, high-quality pretrial service agency capability. It would be highly improbable that you would not start seeing a drop in pretrial population.
Right. Thank you.
Let me, unless somebody else has another question, I've got more. So, no, I gotta go with one more, which is, there's two buckets of folks that are presently pretrial felons in OPP. The folks that are lower risk who might be released if there was a pretrial services program. And those who would not be under any circumstances because the charges they're facing and the risk characteristics that they have wouldn't warrant such a release. Right? If we continue to take a longer time, there's a long simmering disagreement between the prosecutors and the courts on how many cases get brought to trial and what type of trial they got. But I guess my question is that a big part of this or not? Is it, if it takes longer because we're prosecuting more cases that come, if it takes longer because there are more jury trials than not, is that a significant part of this, or is it really that whether that takes 25, 50 days longer per type of case like that, if we just got the folks who, on a risk basis, warrant a release on bond, is that going to solve the bulk of the issue? Because there is this debate in our criminal justice system about that issue.
Right. I think if I hear you right, there's two ways to alter a pretrial population. One is improve efficiencies, independent of risk assessment and pretrial services. That, yes, you can do that. And then on top of that, or independently, you can just have a pretrial service capability that is going to get people out fast, with the courts getting good information about risk level, and they start releasing people that are low risk. You put the two together, that's the ultimate system. Efficiency and pretrial services based on risk assessment. So yeah, they are independent. Put them together, that's where you get the maximum reduction in the pretrial population without jeopardizing public safety.
So are you making the assumption on pretrial conversion savings based on both of those things happening?
Yes, both of those.
And do you have a sense as to which one is a bigger part of the scale?
I don't.
Because if it doesn't matter that we're taking as much time with the actual trials, then we don't need to worry about the efficiency part of it. If that's a big factor, then it's a big factor. I just don't know whether that's a big issue.
The pretrial felons, okay. The pretrial felons are getting out on average about 60 days. So that means a lot of them are getting out pretty fast. Sentence felons, they take a while. So I can't really say that there's an obvious efficiency problem.
Let me ask the question, because we have, our jurisdiction has a very high trial rate, felony trial rate, we double dip. And you mentioned one of the states that was seeing reductions in jail beds was Texas, about 50,000. Their felony trial rate is right at 2%. Ours is, in our office, I don't know system-wide, north of 15%.
15%.
And so it takes,
Of all felons.
Of all felons. So it takes longer, and those folks generally aren't getting out. And to go to trial takes longer generally than to dispose of the carefully plea.
Absolutely.
So would you suspect, there's a bunch of different factors, but given that, our trial rate is more than 7 times that of Texas, would that have an effect on population?
Yeah, obviously. could, if the trial is prolonging the case unnecessarily, and if you could reach a plea agreement earlier about going to trial, yes, in those cases, yes, that obviously is going to add to the pretrial population. I'd like to see that information you have on the 15%. If there's a study or something on that, it'd be good to.
It's just, those are our numbers.
Those are your numbers.
But we did get numbers from other states and then other
Yeah.
counties, so.
Yeah, 15% does strike me as a high trial rate when I usually see other jurisdictions.
Other questions from the panel? Judges, anybody else have a question from the panel? All right, so here's what I'd like to do. Councilman, you have?
Have we talked about the acceptance rate of cases? Of the acceptance rate
No.
charges?
I think
I
that's
don't
related
know.
to what.
Yeah. That's another valve, right? Another valve, another factor that's not captured in this information.
Okay.
I mean, it's captured, but you can't see it.
Yeah, you can't, right,
Yeah,
yeah. All
like
right.
a hidden tax.
And what's
All
the
right,
numbers
so
on the
there-
acceptance rate as compared to other jurisdictions?
I don't know. I definitely.
Anybody?
Well, but,
I haven't seen a national acceptance rate.
yeah, I don't know if there's a national acceptance rate, but comparing us to, well, comparing administrations, of course, the current one has a high acceptance rate. But looking at other jurisdictions, you usually get in the 50 to 60% range.
We accept 85% of cases. I mean, it's not a set, it's not a goal, but the trend is about 85%, up over about 50%.
And to be fair, having just come from Nashville, it's extraordinarily high there as well. It's not 50%. In Nashville, Davidson County, 630,000 people, the acceptance rate is probably overall close to 80%. Burglaries at 99%. There's a huge acceptance rate in other jurisdictions as well.
And you know, what's interesting about the jail population is only a small percent of these people end up going to state prison. Most of them get something or nothing that keeps them in the community.
And it's likely that inside that acceptance rate, we do deal with an incredibly high recidivism rate. So it's not unexpected that you would have a high acceptance rate when the people that you're arresting are, and nobody likes to say these words out loud, but they chose crime as a lifestyle. That's what they do.
You know, one of the things I will calculate, we are able to calculate, now we have like 2 years of data of admissions and releases. How many of those admissions and releases are the same people? And we can calculate that, so I'll provide that to you very shortly.
And you can teach Commissioner Carter's staff how to do the same calculation going forward?
Yes, I can.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Dr. Austin, you mentioned hidden tax as a way of phrasing
It's not
the acceptance
999
rate. What do you mean
program.
by that? I understand, but what,
Well, it's a hidden tax in that if you look at, you know, the disposition of criminal cases, there are decisions being made. It's a tax in terms of how expensive that case becomes. I've seen in certain jurisdictions, not this one, I would never say this about this jurisdiction, but I've seen certain jurisdictions with a public defender unwillingness to make a deal lengthens the time that the client spends in the jail. And they do it for a variety of reasons. So that's their decision, which is not, you know, the prosecutor will come in with a deal, say, here, we're ready to plea out. No, don't want to do that, and we wait 2 or 3 weeks before we, okay, that 2 or 3 weeks, that's going on all the time, that's a tax in terms of the cost of taxpayers who are funding the jail, and how big that jail population, and also a tax on the people that spend time in custody. So, there's a lot of people involved in these cases, and that has to do with, a common thing I'll see again, a person has multiple charges. I don't know if that happens here, you guys can tell me, but
and you have more than one judge involved in that person. And they try to reconcile. I've seen Maricopa County has a very good program where it's a reconciliation process where they meet on a regular basis to reconcile the charges and get it located in a single judge so they can dispose of all the charges at once. As opposed to, let's get a disposition here. District of Columbia is notorious for this. You got to finish this one before the judge even going to consider the charges on this person. And that's a big delay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I was late. You all discussed the racial disparity figures already, and
But there wasn't much discussion other than
They're
they were
there.
presented. I mean, if you have questions about that, you won't be re-asking a question that somebody else has asked. He explained that they remain persistent in New Orleans.
Are they inconsistent then around the other cities?
I rarely do you see that kind of analysis, but I can't name a jurisdiction where I can say, here's what they found. I've seen some national,
But you do this, you've done this, I mean, you brought this to our attention, I'm grateful that you did, but you've done this for other jurisdictions. So you haven't had the data, or you haven't done the analysis?
Not that many of the jails I've looked at. No, quite frankly, I don't get involved in that issue in a lot of the studies we do. We're not asked to do them.
You're
So we
not-
have no idea whether we're unique or not unique.
I
But there's
suspect-
clearly something
Yeah.
in the data that says that
yeah, I don't think it matters.
based on race alone, excluding other factors, that length of stay tends to be significantly longer for African Americans in New Orleans Parish.
I can't say it.
And it
yet.
could be counsel, it could access to counsel, it could be quality of counsel, it could be resources. It's a income, wealth-based system thing.
The only-
It could be other reasons
Yeah.
that are not defensible.
The only justification for such disparity would be that the prior records, the criminal record history of black is worse than it is for white.
Correct. So let me restate that deal. There is no justifiable explanation for that other than prior arrest history,
Risk
nature of the
types of
crime,
issues, right.
risk, right? Any of the other stuff, whether it's access to counsel, income, whatever, those are not justified. I agree with you completely.
So are there examples of, or is there a recommendation from you about how we might dig deeper into assessing or analyzing that situation?
Well, that's what you'd have to, I mean, the simplest way to do it, you take a sample of these releases, because you can't do it on all of them, it's going to be too time consuming. It's going to do a random sample of them, and you get their prior record information. So, for example, let's look at blacks and whites who are charged with drug sales. And we know that the length of stay, that's not a good example, but on the violent, the drug ones are pretty, largely parity. If you looked at, for example, nonviolent things, the difference in length of stay, 39 days versus 27 days, burglary 85. Burglary would be a good one, 85 versus 40, twice as much. Okay. You go into those cases and see what's the prior record of the blacks and the whites. Bail amounts, and you do a special study of them to see is there a difference in those characteristics that would justify basically an inability of the blacks to be able to get out of the jail at the same rate time frame as the whites are.
And is that stuff that we have data for? We just haven't.
Yeah, I don't think you have,
studied it?
the prior record stuff, I don't think, you have to go in, you'd have to go into a special study. I mean, literally what you have to do, you get the sample and then you get the criminal record history of that person and you measure it and then you aggregate it and you count it and you see here's the differences.
But
I think
The data exists.
The data exists, they
You
may-
all can through the foundation, maybe sponsor a criminal justice professor at local universities to do this, right?
Well, it's very straightforward to do,
Okay.
and it is not hard to do, it'll take some time, but
Sorry, I'm just spending.
That, you know, everyone is, but, well, I guess,
let me put it this way, if you wanted to do it, you should be able to do it in 90 days. Have an answer in 90
Okay.
days.
Good.
Well, isn't it also true a pretrial services, a robust pretrial services would give you the ability to analyze this, not just for example, but in wholesale? If they come through the system, you can take down income information. You could probably compare, if your risk assessment tool, based on the scoring, had access to prior records. So you could compare just, for example, 16 gets you in, which would mean folks with 16 have a comparable risk and record level. Just as an example, you could get a rough cut that way, but even without that, you could also use information that's gathered on a real-time basis, not just in a sample, but for the entire population of your pretrial services.
You could analyze it, and more importantly, if you had the pretrial service agency, I would probably guarantee that the differences would start shrinking.
Right. If
So-
you wanted to
so-
see
so-
why these numbers are what they are
Well, in
now,
fact, I think
you'd
there's
have to do it with folks who hadn't been through
There is-
pretrial services.
there is a jurisdiction-
the existing population.
And I can't look at it that we did, which was Harris County, Texas. And I know we looked at this by race.
Yeah, if you can get that, we'll distribute it to this.
Which
channel
they have a
and put it
very
on our
robust
website.
pretrial service agency there.
Yeah, so interestingly, the pretrial agency solves two problems. One is it enables pretrial releases for those who are risk appropriate. And secondly, to the extent that disparity is caused by factors related not to risk, but to income. Factors not related to level of charges, seriousness of the crime, but some other
They remove race as a direct impact. Yeah.
unjustified rationale, just taking that action of implementing that program could reduce this effect significantly.
Yes.
well, and it also, I think, Andy, mitigates this other point that Dr. Austin makes about if we can reduce the so-called rap sheet of people, right? Whether or not folks choose to be criminals or whether they have other life circumstances. Reducing that ultimately reduces their length of stay and how they get treated in the system if they're in the system less. And that potentially mitigates that.
Other discussion from the commissioners? So here's what I'm going to propose. There's no more discussion. We have folks who, at this meeting, generally want to make a short public comment. So I'm going to suggest two things. One is, if you want to make a public comment, you're welcome to make a public comment. If you have a question, I'm going to hope Dr. Austin will be willing to answer questions. We're going to do it like the mayor does on his community meetings, which is we're not answering the questions as you ask them. So he'll write down all the questions, or Sam will help him write down all the questions. And then, so everybody who makes a statement, everybody who asks a question, asks a question. And at the end of the public comment, except Dr. Austin's table, he will answer the questions that have been asked. And so you can direct questions to Dr. Austin based on his presentation, if that sounds right. So we're going to do 2 minutes of public comment per person, one time only. And if folks want to raise their hand, I'll start identifying folks if you've got a question or a public comment. And yes, ma'am, you had your hand up in the middle of the presentation, so you get to ask your question first.
Yes, I did. First, I have a comment. My name is Sandra Yule, and I'm a children's advocate at John McDonough High School. And I have to tell you, as the grandmother of 2 African-American boys, this meeting makes me very nervous. First of all, I feel that every human being can be redeemed. And what I'd like to say is there is a direct cause between our schools. I live 2 blocks from John McDonough High School. There are police cars at that school every day. Children from our high schools are being arrested. They're going to jail, and their education is stopped. Basically, their life is stopped. These are not inmates that I see. These are men, young men. They're not pretrial felons, they're men. This is my question, mainly to Mr. Carter. Why can't we partner with businesses in the area, the Recovering School District, OTSB, and provide training, job placement for our young men? They're sitting in jail, they're doing nothing. If we don't want them to come out and commit crimes and sell drugs, why can't we train them while they're in jail and save some of these young men?
Thank you. Next comment or question? Yes, sir.
Are you all going to answer, or are you?
As I said at the beginning, if you have a question, we'll write it down. We'll answer it at the end. If the panelist is willing to answer, or Dr. Austin is willing to answer, we're going to go through the public comments first.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I don't have a comment, but I do have several questions. As a matter of fact, I have about 7, 8 of them that I'd like to have on the record. The first question is, what is the correlation of the jail population and bail bonds for pretrial release on the jail population? What is the bail bond correlation to the jail population? The second question is, what is the correlation of the amount of mentally ill people we have in jail on charges? The third question is, how close are we to the projections and benchmarks goals that our new policy on policing with warrants instead of being arrested, what did that do when it comes to benchmarks of goals that were projected? The fourth question is, what effect do you think giving bail bondsmen access to inmates while they're in jail, like they can do in Jefferson Parish, would have upon getting people released pre-trial? The fifth question, how many cases of people in jail are being held in jail while being denied a speedy trial? Number 6, what is the acceptance rates of cases in comparison to other jurisdictions? You see, I was 95%. How does that compare to neighboring states and states across the country? Number 7, what effect does having more than one judge, I'm sorry, you guys answered that one. Number 8, what effect does OIP being underfunded and understaffed have on people being kept in jail longer than normal? And that's my 8 questions.
Anybody else for a comment or question?
I have a question about the reduction, the 300-person reduction that we have seen since you last looked at the numbers. And I think you said that that was due primarily to a reduction in DOC folks being held there. And I was wondering if you could explain whether that was due only to the closure of South White because of the construction, or whether the sheriff also had changed his policies on housing DOC folks.
Any other comments or questions? That brings public comment to a close. And Commissioner, you want to start? James, you want to start answering? That's the question. So you have one about.
Thank you for your question, ma'am. Actually in the process right now of doing just that. I had a meeting with the business community today to address that particular issue, and it's part of a larger reentry initiative that we are undertaking, including as a follow-up to the Saving Our Sons crime summit that happened. There are businesses who have committed to working with us. We are capturing those particular businesses to address that issue, and specifically to provide employment opportunities to young men right now. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that after we leave here. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, James. I believe the rest of the questions were for Dr. Austin. So, Dr. Austin.
And I think, gentlemen, you asked about 5 or 6 questions that had to do bail amounts, correlation of people in jail with mental health conditions, violation of speedy trial, acceptance rates. Those are the key things that I heard you mention. All I can say at this point, I haven't looked at those issues, but we can look at those. So I don't know how you want to proceed, but
and maybe this report, Andy, I could add a section on these issues and tell you what we can tell you about, like the bail amounts, and bail amounts could be hindering people, obviously, from getting out, can't afford to raise that bail. Mentally ill, I don't know, that's up to the sheriff. The sheriff would have to have a flag in his database that would say, here's the number of people that are incarcerated who have a known mental health problem. Or that may be in some other study that's been done here, but we can certainly try and find out. On the speedy trial, we can certainly look at how many people are going past that speedy trial limitation, so we can report that out. I don't have this information now, but I think we might be able to research it, yes.
If there's a speedy trial motion filed, then it would be a court, Judge, correct me if I'm wrong, it'd be a court release if we don't try the person within the correct amount of time.
Unless, do you get a waiver? Do you get a waiver on that?
Yeah, you can get, that's correct. You can, it can be taken up for reason.
I understand
It's
that.
not an automatic release.
Right.
There was a question on acceptance rates. I think the district attorney's representative answered that, which is 85%, not 95% is their acceptance rate. The OIP, I assume that's the Independent Police Monitor?
I think it's
No, he's talking about
OPD.
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 The funding for
I'm sorry,
OPD.
OPD funding. And best as I can tell it, I have, the public defender left, but he's been more worried about his future budgets than he has been his current budget, because the state is reducing support for the Office of Public Defender. And so when I've spoken with him about his budgetary concerns, primarily about reduced state funding as opposed to an absence of current year funding. He's been watching his board tell him that at the state level they're going to give him less, trying to make adjustments in local funding to offset that cut from the state. To remind you what the mayor says all the time, when they start fighting about money in Washington or in Baton Rouge, it hits the streets in the city of New Orleans. And so if there's a cut to any level of government programming, whether it's criminal justice or anyone else at the federal and state level, it actually hits the street right here. And I think what he's been citing is that reduction in state aid at the Office of the Public Defender.
And I get, but Andy, I guess the question was, if there is a reduction, will that increase length of stay and that kind of thing? And I know Derwin is gone, but has he mentioned any of that to you, or do we have any sense from anybody else around the table?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that he would say that.
That's correct.
That's same thing, any reduction to the DA would potentially slow down their prosecutions because they have less staff to do the work, and the courts have concerns about funding and their ability to do their required work as well. When you're in an environment of limited resources, it makes everybody's job more challenging, including the public defender, and including the DA, and including the courts. And they're all in that position these days. The question about DOC population?
Yes, I'm sorry. I believe it'd be fair to say that it was reduced because they needed to close that facility. It was not a change in a permanent policy.
And NOPD reduction. Yes, part of NOPD reduction.
Yeah, that's right. The first gentleman asked about whether NOPD arrest rates have had the effect that was anticipated.
No, that's what he
No, the gentleman asked, I think, a question that you would answer, which is, what has been the effect of NOPD's policy to do citation for certain kinds of violations?
It's significant.
And to choose not to bring to jail out of parish warrants.
That's been huge.
So that's had a significant effect.
I think, looking at this, that was a very positive development, very positive. And so, in some ways, we're halfway there. We got the intake down, but now we got to work on the length of stay as best we can.
So one of the things that I would like to ask you to do, I mean, if the other questions about bail are something that is within the scope of the data you have and not incredibly difficult, then to be responsive to the request, let's see if we can update that. We'll post that on our website and send out an email as we do to notify people about that information being available when it is available. Thank you for that. The other thing is, you applied a set of assumptions for what if these reforms were implemented.
Right.
If you could take those set of assumptions and apply it to the current projection.
Right.
My assumption, based on your answer to my question earlier, is it's not going to produce the same answer it produced a year ago, because many of the police practices have in fact been implemented.
Correct.
And so that savings in
Is now in place.
average daily population is in place. So you only have a potential reduction from other reforms yet to be implemented. That's going to produce a higher number in that projection, I suspect, than the projection a year ago. Maybe not.
A higher number?
Well, it strikes me that the projection actually that you made last year was off. Because you didn't anticipate, I'm just saying, you did not anticipate an increased length of stay.
Right, that's correct.
So the baseline was trending up. The police practices trended it down. And then there was potentially additional, now maybe the reform that needs to be implemented.
If we put back in the DOC inmates, okay, if he had not closed down that facility and dropped the DOC, the projection that we had is lower than what the actual would be. It'd be about 150 to 200 above what we said a year ago it was going to be.
Right, but I think that it was a mistake for us to put those two in the same bucket. I mean, they end up in the same bucket, which is how many people are at OPP. The decision to house DOC prisoners is a policy choice. The population of local pretrial inmates is a collection of actions by a variety of different individuals and organizations.
Right.
And so the local population is a very complex organism.
Right.
The DOC population is a policy choice.
We could reset the local projections separately. Do that in
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you to do.
That won't be hard to do. That
Okay.
will be higher than what it was a year ago.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, if there's, and maybe it won't be higher, because if the solution to the length of stay issue is in fact a pretrial services agency that's effective in implementing its policies, it may have more effectiveness on reducing that length of stay that was predicted. On the other hand, if it's efficiency, then we have to do reforms on efficiency. If it's simply a risk-based effort to do pretrial services effectively, I mean, you're the expert on this. I'm not. I'm just trying to get the update on where we are today. And it seems like the baseline was in fact lower than it could have been, because we didn't anticipate the increased length of stay.
Correct.
And so maybe the answer is we need to reform on that, but I don't know what that is besides pretrial.
Well, we can definitely, in this report, reset the baseline projection for the local and keep the DOC. And that's why they were presented separately, like pots there, and reset that. And then we can speculate about, which is the pretrial service agency, which sounds like it's getting close, ready to go. What impact, do we still feel that would have a significant impact on lowering the new baseline for the local sentence population?
And can we also, whether it's by giving definition to these methods of release.
Yeah, we'll-
Or otherwise, do whatever we can do to figure out what is dramatically increasing the length of stay. 'Cause I keep thinking, if we got fewer people going in,
Yep,
and serious crimes are kind of level,
yep.
then we should have the same number of serious crimes going in now as we had before. So that, it's not that, it's, the serious crimes people should be having about the same length of stay, absent some other factor affecting it. And so I think it's extremely important to any prediction into the future to understand what's created this length of stay issue.
And I would ask public defenders down here, but people in the courts, is there anything that you see going on, in discussions, coffee shop chatter, or what this is, case processing is changing. Sometimes you get new judges. I don't know if that's been going on. Anything that people think might be clues here as to why that length of stay has increased for the people that are coming into the system. Some people are closer to the situation may say, I know what's going on, this is what's changed. Some cases, the calendaring system has changed. I don't know. So if someone has some ideas about that, that'd be helpful for us to hear those ideas.
So you'll be able to update that report for us?
Yeah, we'll do that with these things. We'll also add that the percent of people that come in more than once in 2 years, and the bail stuff. Mental health stuff, I don't know if I can get that. Speedy trial, I know legally they can't go past it, but there may be still examples where the waiver has been granted and they're spending a lot longer than what the speedy trial, envisions, I guess.
No question there?
Well, we already did public comment.
I think this is what the whole thing is about. We sit here for 2.5 hours and listen to people talk. Let me say
If you'd like to make a comment, go ahead and make a
Let me
comment,
say
and you and the other gentleman both.
Yeah, because this is about feedback. I didn't have a comment until you started talking, so I need to talk now.
Go ahead.
And what I'm saying is that folks in this room has lost interest in the process, not us. I'm talking about folks sitting around the table. Half of them not showing up. The ones who are here, with the exception of today, the chief, every time he's here, he speaks. Even rightly so, he had reason to gloat about, he have implemented a policy that came out of this group that we want to do something. He should feel good about that. The council person is asking pertinent questions from folks around the table who can answer these questions, and it's like mum is the word. That's disingenuous. That is disingenuous to everybody around the table, to us sitting here who have answers to these very same questions. Truth has a way of finding favor, this
Go ahead
favor.
and tell us the answer.
What I'm saying,
You have an answer.
but that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the questions that Mr. Austin's saying, he just said just now, we got the front end solved. The chieftain stopped arresting people, people stopped going into the jail. The length of stay is in the hands of the people sitting around the table, the DA's office, the judges. They control that. This basic question about, we asked this question 6 months ago about what is a court release. 6 months later, we're still trying to figure it out. Come on, get real. Somebody around this table knew the answer to that question. And for us to keep going back and forth about things we already knew the answer to, is disingenuous. This lady's trying to put together a budget that takes in our tax dollars for a process to pay y'all for the most part. And this is what we get in return? Tell me you get 2 minutes at the end of a discussion. I forgot about the damn question I wanted to ask 2 hours ago. Come on, if we're going to do this and do this in invite the community in, let it be a dialogue. You say you want to do it like the mayor done? I went to every one of those things that the mayor had. And that was the discussion. Somebody asked a question. He turned to one of y'all and said, answer that question right now. Not at the end of the day. Answer that question right now. Why this process can't happen here? That's all we saying. Be fair to us. This is your job. But it's our lives and our livelihood that's paying for y'all to have this job. So kind of like, just going to be a hidden tax on us. At least, let's see it. Let it roll out in front of us saying, this conversation is supposed to be about 1438. Here we go, here we stay. We kind of like going over stuff that Mr. Austin already said. In this country, crime is done this. In this city, crime is done this. So the question is, why do we need this big old jail that the sheriff wants to build? Nobody wants to answer that question. That's what this whole working group is about. When they introduced that ordinance, it was about to come to a conclusion about the jail size. This group voted 9-3 to say 1438, we're going to lock it. Now he's saying we may not even need 1438. The police done his job. He done showed you. I'm going to stop the intake. So all we got to do is figure out why black kids are staying in the jail longer than white kids. She asked that question 3 times. And that's about setting bails. That's about access to power. That who can call who on the phone and say, my child's in jail, can you get him out? That's what this is all about. But we don't want to have that conversation. It's time for to have this conversation. And I think we need to move this conversation down in the council chambers so more people can come, and it needs to be at 5 o'clock in the evening so the people who pay y'all salary can be a part of this conversation. And that way it can be public access also. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Yes, sir. So, let me just...
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I have a point of order for my questions. I come to you as a person with experience, as a bail bondsman, as a person who has a son that's been in jail. So I've been through the process. I'm also an active chaplain in Sheriff Gutman's jail. So I'm giving you feedback, not from me, I'm not self-sent. I'm giving you actual feedback from people that's in jail. I've hand-walked at least 5 701s to the post office. And at least 3 of the 5 have gotten out of jail because I brought it there. It didn't make it there in the mail. But when I brought it there and they processed them and was able to find a OIDP, incident defendant, to represent them, they were released. But up until me doing that, it couldn't get nobody's attention. That's why the jail's full. Because the DA is dragging his foot to keep them in there. And because the OIDP don't have the staff. They don't have the staff to deal with those people's individual needs. Of those 8 questions I asked you, only one of them was answered on the floor. So I would appreciate if you include all 7 of them in your research.
Let's make sure you got them written down?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll do our best. We did our best a few minutes ago to try to answer those. Mr. Henderson, I think the whole focus of our conversation has been consistent with, and we did just like the mayor does. You ask a question, we try to answer it to the best of our abilities. We assign it to the right person who's going to answer it, and we've done that as well. The purpose of this continuation of this group's meeting is to finish the work that we began over a year ago. We came to a resolution earlier, or late last year, that was implemented by the council earlier this year to commence with building the 1,438 beds. The question at that time was whether that was sufficient or insufficient, whether there was a need for additional beds based on a policy decision by the city of New Orleans and the sheriff to continue to house DOC prisoners, and how many, and whether or not 1,438 beds was in fact sufficient. I think what Dr. Austin said today, I'll let him speak for himself on this issue, was that if you successfully implement a number of these reforms and you choose not to have any state prisoners, 1,438 beds could well be enough for your local prison population. What we've seen in the last year is that despite the changed police practices, the length of stay has increased. That 1,438 conclusion may in fact no longer stand if those reforms, even if pretrial is implemented. That is a piece of his analysis. We can disagree with the analysis. We can say that the length of stay ought to go back to 14.7 days from the 24 days it is now. And that could bring us back to where we were in his prior analysis. But where we are today is where we are today. So he's going to update that projection, say if you implement pretrial, this is what I think that number is. And we can debate what that number is again. And if we can improve the efficiency of our criminal justice system, and if we can address the disparities.
They shut for a meeting. How are we going to improve efficiency? They won't shut for a meeting. We've been here waiting on a report from 3 different working groups. Everybody living in this city. I mean, we do work on email. We need to get the report done. If we can't get the report done about the racial disparity about this length of stay,
right. And so
Zalian made a presentation. Half the group wasn't even here.
So, point well taken to the folks who didn't choose to participate.
Sir,
People address
you,
this
you
decision.
said you could have the right to disagree with this analysis. What gives you the right to disagree with the people who went to the city council chambers and asked the city council to vote for the 1,438 beds? The city council made a decision, they took a vote, and now you didn't like the answer, so you want to come back and redo it. What gives you that right?
So, sir, no,
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your comment.
Yes, sir.
I don't believe that that is at all.
It wasn't a
consistent.
comment, it was a question.
Yes, sir. I don't believe that the responsibility that the mayor charged this group with, or the resolution that the council adopted reflects your statement there. Yes, there were a number of folks, yourself may have been included in that, who said to the council, we want this building built and no additional beds. When the resolution was passed by this group, the words of that resolution, they're posted on our website, said very clearly, this is where we are today. We believe, and I think Dr. Austin's words were, there's absolutely no reason, based on the data and the possible reforms, not to greenlight 1,438 beds. Whether we need more than that or not is another discussion. So many folks feel like that is the stopping point, and that's certainly something I've heard very clearly from members of the public. I'm not going to suggest that that is not the case. You know, a number of folks who've said that and believe that, and feel passionately about it, and I've heard that. This group, when it passed that resolution, agreed to review whether or not there was any justification, policy-wise or otherwise, for building additional beds beyond the 1,438. We are still addressing that question. We have not come to any conclusions, and part of our approach has always been to use the data to guide our decision-making. That's why we asked Dr. Austin to update the data around that.
So in answer to my question, you're saying this group has the right to override the city council decision?
No, sir, that's a great point. Thank you for clarifying that. This group does not have the right to override the city council. This group is advisory only. It made a recommendation last time, and the city council was the entity with the legal authority to take action, and they chose to take action. They could have disregarded the recommendation of this group had they chosen to. This is an advisory group with no power other than to give advice per the mayor's recommendation, per the mayor's request of us.
So now you're requesting that the city council reconsider their decision?
We have not made any motion. We are considering the question of whether or not we should ask the city council to approve any more beds for the Orleans Parish Prison. We have not decided that. We have not made a decision on that, and that is what we're debating as we speak.
That's good.
Thank you. I just want to add to this that in my mind, I've been watching monthly the jail bed count, the prison count of the local prisoners monthly go up since January. Every month increasing, and wondering, and we could not get the data from the sheriff or from wherever we needed it to give us an answer to why it is that we're using the summonses, we're arresting less people, but the local jail population is increasing, and it's been doing it steadily month after month. I think it is a waste of the taxpayers' money and Dr. Austin's time to ask him at this point to give us an estimate based on his data now as to whether, or as to what the jail population will be with or without pretrial services, until we determine what has caused the substantial length of stay increase. I don't think we can know, I don't think he can know how to project into the future unless we get the answer to what this length of stay increase is comprised of, because it could be something that we could effectively cut off immediately and go back to last year's length of stay figure. Or it could be something, could be any number of things, but until we know the answer to that question, I don't believe that Dr. Austin can give us an adequate estimation for the future of our needs.
Andy, Susan, let me, in response to what you just said, in the response to the previous question from Norris, you gave a lot of sort of intangibles. If we can control for this, if we can control for this, if we can control for length of stay, if we can control for efficiencies in the system. And in answer to your question, Councilwoman, we don't have to put the ifs there. We can make those controls. Those are intangibles. Length of stay is not an intangible. You can make mandates concerning lengths of stay. You can make mandates to the sheriff and mandates to the city, particularly because we have some controls over pocketbooks concerning efficiencies. Intangibles may be whether somebody tomorrow is going to go and shoot 30 people. That's an intangible. So in answer to your question, Councilwoman Guidry, no, Dr. Austin can go on ahead and make these findings. We have to make the decision here and now to control for those tangibles, because they're not intangible. You need to start saying, okay, length of stays will be at a certain level, period.
Okay, that's another step.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is taking data that we have now and doing some kind of calculation out when the data we have now is it's indefinable. So we don't know if it's good data from which to make a calculation. And I think we need to determine that before the calculation, because somebody's going to use that calculation for their purposes. And I think the calculation should be a calculation based on known factors.
Well, let me.
And then your step is more progress for what we do. And we need to then go to future steps.
Commissioner Carter.
Let me speak to a tangible issue. The biggest thing I've heard today, Dr. Austin, from you and from the discussion is that this issue of the implementation of the pretrial services is central to making sure that the population remains, low as necessary going forward. So the issue of the pretrial services, I want folks to know that the administration is clearly and squarely supporting and ready with regard to pretrial services. In fact, we are calculating for that in next year's budget. And so the issue now with regard to pretrial services is the issue of where the pretrial services will in fact happen. So I'm talking about location, take place. And so that's an issue that's pushing them forward. So, but from the administration's perspective on what I heard is Dr. Austin, you listening to me?
I'm listening to
All right, you agree that your report, and you're saying that in terms of the number of individuals housed in the jail, it's mostly affected under this paradigm by the issue of not implementing the pretrial services. That we don't have a pretrial service. Is that correct?
That plus the system efficiencies.
Plus, but what I'm saying, I want to get a tangible here. I mean, I want to respond directly. That the administration is prepared. We're preparing next year in the budget. We're talking with Vera. We have to get the actual location issue down, but we're ready to do that. Okay.
Thank you. Last comment, Mr. Henderson. This is last public comment?
I may not even come back.
Yes, sir.
And the reason for it is, a year ago, at this same conversation, everybody was so empathetic about, oh, it's a shame those folks are sitting in the jail. Remember we was talking about all those pretrial misdemeanors and felonies were in the jail. The people around this table who had the power to change that dynamic didn't do anything. Didn't do anything. That's the conversation I'm saying. We're not holding people to task. The people who are responsible for the back end of this thing, they're doing nothing. They're sitting on their hands. One of the things I also know is that ever since we brought the camera in the room, everybody sure enough has been mum. It used to be kind of jolly in here, people talking, laughing and stuff. But since this camera's been in the room, nobody's saying a word. It's almost like, oh, I ain't gonna let the cat out the bag. That is sinful. That is sinful and shameful that we got to hide behind whatever curtain that we hide behind. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, in the law, most folks in the room are lawyers, they have some legal background. From the facts come the law. The facts are making it clear that we have a process that hasn't been, everybody gonna say it's transparent because we can look up there and see. We weren't even given copies of that. We weren't even given copies of that. We the people paying, for this jail. We didn't even get copies of this so we could see, okay, what Dr. Austin proposing for us. All he gave us, ain't no sense getting mad with Sam, Andy. Ain't no sense getting mad with Sam.
I'm just checking.
But I'm saying, Sam put the graphs up there. The report itself, it should have been, just like the one on the table, it should have been in the chairs. It's our tax dollar that you're spending. That's all I'm saying. Pack fair with us. We can analyze that. Folks sitting back here have a clue. Trust me. We have a clue.
That's why we're having a dialogue, and that's why we post everything on our website, that report.
But this wasn't on your website. This will be on your website tonight or tomorrow. This is after the fact. This is after the fact.
We just received.
No. Don't make me now. I walked in the room with a copy. Hello.
Yes.
I walked in the room with a copy. So it's not like this wasn't embargoed or something. Don't play us like that. That's all I'm saying. Don't play us like that.
We released the report today at this meeting, and it will be on our website
But see,
today.
don't you think the public, when the council releases something, they have 24 hours to release it to the public. Put us on notice that this is what this conversation is going to be about. We walk in, we get an agenda, and we say we're going to have public comment at the end. I want to discuss the nuts and bolts, not the graphs.
Thank you.
I'm going to do
one comment.
Yeah, all right. And just out of respect, like Nas was saying, the reason we got this table here is because of the work that the grassroots and people done. The independent monitor, the Department of Justice that's down here now, that's researched without any resource that we have put together data and information that we have this table discussion among all the other things that's been elected in this city for an independent monitor, and now the Department of Justice is here. These are the people on the ground that's done that work that the city didn't do. No, all right?
That's correct.
Except for the independent monitor.
Okay.
But again, even that wasn't something that Riley said we need to have the independent monitor. That was something that people pushed, and Mr. Carter took it to the
10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago. So all I'm saying is these people on the ground is doing a lot of work, and even though we're not sitting at that table, but respect our mind that we do, or we should have something to say about this process.
We do appreciate your participation and the group's participation in these meetings since they started last July. All right, with that, we're adjourned, and thank y'all very much.
Stranger.